Everyone walked away from the dying wolf in the snow, but the rejected Omega was the only one who knelt beside him and sang a song that no one else remembered. The first winter storm of the year covered the northern forest of Silverpine Kingdom with a blanket of white, hiding the paths and silencing the usual sounds of the wild. Deep within the frozen woods, Lillian Harper walked alone with a small basket of herbs in her hands. She was an Omega who had learned long ago that kindness did not always earn kindness in return. The people of her former pack had looked at her as someone ordinary, someone without influence, someone who would never stand beside a powerful alpha. But Lillian never allowed their opinions to decide her worth. She continued helping those who needed her, even when no one noticed. That evening, as she traveled back toward her small cottage, she heard a faint sound beneath the cold wind. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have continued walking. But Lillian stopped. Hidden near the edge of the forest was a large silver wolf resting quietly in the snow. His eyes carried a strange sadness, unlike any animal she had ever seen. There was something about him that felt different, almost as if he was carrying a story no one knew. Lillian slowly approached and whispered, "You look like someone who has been waiting a long time for someone to care." The wolf watched her carefully, but he did not move away. Instead of fear, Lillian felt compassion. She removed her warm cloak and placed it gently beside him, offering comfort without expecting anything in return. She knew the villagers would tell her she was foolish. They would say an Omega like her should not waste time helping a creature that could not help her back. But Lillian had never believed kindness needed a reward. She carefully guided the wolf toward her small cottage and created a safe place for him to rest. That night, while the wind moved outside her window, Lillian sat beside the quiet wolf and began to sing. It was a simple melody her grandmother had taught her when she was young. A song about hope, healing, and finding light during the darkest moments. The moment the first notes filled the room, something changed. The wolf became calmer, as if the song reached a place deeper than words could reach. Lillian did not know that the creature beside her was not an ordinary wolf. She did not know that beyond the forest waited a kingdom searching for its missing ruler. She did not know that the quiet stranger she protected was Ethan Blackwood, the powerful Alpha King of Silverpine. To everyone else, he was a symbol of strength and authority. But to Lillian, he was simply a lonely soul who needed someone to believe he was worth saving. And as the snow continued to fall outside her cottage, destiny quietly began its first step toward bringing two worlds together. The wolf that Lillian Harper saved remained beside her cottage as the days passed, but she never once asked what he could do for her. She simply cared for him because she believed every living soul deserved kindness. Each morning, she prepared warm food, checked his condition, and spoke to him as if he understood every word. To Lillian, he was not a creature to fear. He was a silent companion who had somehow found his way to the one place where he was welcomed. Deep within the forest, the silver wolf slowly began to recover. His strength returned little by little, but his eyes still carried the weight of memories that Lillian could not see. He was Ethan Blackwood, the Alpha King of Silverpine Kingdom, a ruler known throughout the land for his wisdom and power. Yet in this small cottage, away from the expectations of the throne, he experienced something he rarely found: peace. Before meeting Lillian, Ethan had spent his entire life surrounded by people who respected his title. Every conversation carried hidden intentions. Every gesture came with expectations. As the Alpha King, he was always seen as a symbol, never simply as a person. But Lillian did not know his name. She did not know his position. She did not care about the crown he carried or the influence he held. She only saw a wounded wolf who needed warmth and patience. One evening, as Lillian sat near the fireplace, she looked at him and smiled softly. "I wonder what kind of life you had before you came here," she said. "You seem like someone who has carried a lot of responsibility." The wolf quietly watched her, and for a moment, Ethan felt as if she understood him better than anyone in the palace ever had. Lillian continued sharing stories about her village, her childhood, and the dreams she once had before others convinced her that an Omega like her should expect less from life. She never spoke with anger. She simply accepted that some people failed to see her value. That acceptance surprised Ethan more than anything. He had faced countless challenges as a king, but he had never met someone who could remain gentle after being overlooked by the world. As the nights passed, Lillian continued singing the old melody that had calmed him before. She believed it was only a simple song passed down through her family. She did not know the sound carried a rare gift connected to ancient Omega traditions. She did not know that every note reached something hidden deep within the Alpha King's heart. Meanwhile, far beyond the forest, Silverpine Kingdom waited for answers. The disappearance of Ethan had left the royal court uncertain. The kingdom searched for their missing ruler, unaware that he was resting peacefully in the home of the very person many would have ignored. And inside that small cottage, an unexpected bond was forming. The Omega who had been rejected by society was showing kindness to the most powerful Alpha in the land. She had no idea that the quiet wolf beside her would one day stand before the entire kingdom and reveal that the person who saved him was the one person destiny had chosen for him. The days inside Lillian Harper's small cottage passed quietly, but the connection between the Omega and the mysterious silver wolf grew stronger with every sunrise. Lillian never expected anything in return for her kindness. She continued preparing herbs, gathering supplies, and caring for the injured creature as naturally as she cared for the people in her village. To her, compassion was not something that needed to be earned. It was simply something she believed everyone deserved. But the wolf watching her was beginning to understand that her kindness was something rare. Ethan Blackwood had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. As the Alpha King, every decision he made carried consequences, and every person who approached him saw the crown before they saw the man. But Lillian was different. She spoke to him without fear. She smiled at him without expecting favors. She offered him comfort without knowing his power. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was not carrying the weight of an entire kingdom alone. One afternoon, Lillian returned from the village with a worried expression. She had heard whispers that some people were searching the forest, looking for the missing ruler of Silverpine Kingdom. She did not know the wolf beside her was the very person everyone was trying to find. She simply looked at him and said, "I hope whoever they are searching for has someone who cares about them." Ethan lowered his eyes, feeling the meaning behind her words. She was not talking about a king. She was talking about a person. That evening, Lillian noticed something unusual. The silver wolf seemed restless, almost as if he wanted to tell her something. She sat beside him near the fireplace and began humming the familiar melody her grandmother had taught her. Slowly, the wolf relaxed. The warmth in her voice filled the small room, creating a peaceful moment neither of them wanted to end. Ethan remembered ancient stories from his childhood about a rare Omega gift that could connect with the hearts of others. Many believed those stories were only legends. But as he listened to Lillian's song, he began to wonder if the legends had been true all along. Lillian had no idea that her simple actions were changing the future of an entire kingdom. She only knew that the lonely wolf who arrived in the snow deserved a chance to heal. Meanwhile, in Silverpine Palace, the search for Ethan continued. The royal advisors struggled to understand how their powerful Alpha King could disappear without explanation. Some believed he had followed a path only he understood. Others feared the kingdom was losing its direction without his presence. But none of them knew the truth. The strongest Alpha in the land was not surrounded by guards or sitting upon a throne. He was resting beside a humble Omega who treated him with more kindness than anyone else ever had. And as Ethan watched Lillian prepare another healing remedy under the soft candlelight, he realized something that surprised him. The person who had saved him was not seeking recognition. She was not looking for power. She was simply being herself. And that was exactly what made her impossible to forget. The quiet days in Lillian Harper's cottage continued, but the bond between the Omega and the Silver Wolf had become something neither of them expected. What started as a simple act of kindness had slowly turned into a connection built on trust. Every morning, Lillian opened the door to let in the fresh forest air, and the wolf would follow her outside as she collected herbs and prepared healing remedies. She never questioned why he stayed. She never wondered what he could offer her. She was simply grateful that a lonely creature had found a place where he felt safe. Ethan Blackwood watched her carefully, amazed by the way she treated the world around her. Before meeting Lillian, he believed strength came from power, influence, and the ability to command respect. But this Omega had shown him another kind of strength. She carried kindness even after being rejected. She offered warmth even after experiencing loneliness. She continued helping others even when many had failed to see her value. One morning, Ethan noticed Lillian return from the village carrying fewer supplies than usual. When he looked at her, he sensed something was wrong. "The villagers are struggling," she whispered. "Some families lost their harvest this season, and they need more help than they are receiving." Ethan felt a familiar feeling rise inside him. As King Alpha, he had always believed protecting his people was his greatest responsibility. But hearing Lillian speak about the villagers with such genuine concern reminded him that leadership was not only about making decisions from a throne. It was about understanding the lives behind those decisions. That evening, Lillian sat near the fireplace and began singing her grandmother's old melody again. This time, Ethan noticed something he had never felt before. The song did not simply calm him. It seemed to awaken memories buried deep within his heart. He remembered his childhood, the lessons his parents had taught him, and the reason he became a ruler in the first place. He remembered that a true alpha was not defined by how many people followed him, but by how many people he cared for. The realization left him silent. The Omega everyone ignored possessed a gift that reached beyond words. Her voice carried comfort, but her actions carried something even greater. They carried hope. Meanwhile, inside Silverpine Palace, the royal advisors continued their search for Ethan. They searched nearby villages and questioned travelers passing through the kingdom. Yet no one suspected that their missing ruler was only a short distance away, resting beside the one person who had never cared about his title. Back at the cottage, Lillian looked at the silver wolf and smiled. "I think someone important is looking for you," she said gently. "But I hope you know you are welcome here for as long as you need." Ethan felt a feeling he had almost forgotten. Acceptance. Not because he was the Alpha King. Not because he held authority over others. But because someone saw him as he truly was. As the night grew quiet, Ethan understood that his time hiding could not last forever. Soon, he would have to return to his kingdom. Soon, Lillian would discover the truth about the wolf she saved. But before that moment came, Ethan wanted to remember every second of the first place where he was treated not as a king, but as someone worthy of kindness. The morning light entered Lillian Harper's cottage softly, painting the wooden walls with a warm golden glow. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. The Omega who had been rejected by her former pack was no longer alone, and the silver wolf who had appeared in the snow no longer looked like a lost soul. But deep inside, Ethan Blackwood knew that their quiet days together were coming to an end. The kingdom needed its Alpha King back. Silverpine needed its ruler. Yet leaving the small cottage felt harder than any responsibility he had ever carried. Lillian prepared herbs near the window while the wolf watched her silently. She noticed the sadness in his eyes and gently placed a hand near him. "You know," she whispered, "sometimes people leave because they have something important waiting for them. That does not mean the moments they shared were meaningless." Ethan felt the weight of her words. She was unknowingly speaking about him. She was reminding him that returning to his throne did not erase the kindness he had found here. That afternoon, distant sounds from the forest caught Lillian's attention. A group of royal messengers had entered the area searching for their missing king. She watched from a distance as they called for Ethan, unaware that the answer they wanted was standing beside her. The moment Ethan heard his name spoken by others, he knew the time had arrived. He looked at Lillian, knowing everything was about to change. She had welcomed him without knowing his identity. She had cared for him without expecting anything. Soon, she would discover that the quiet wolf she protected was actually the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. When Ethan finally stepped away from the cottage, he looked back one last time. Lillian stood at the doorway, her expression filled with concern rather than fear. She did not know where he came from or why others were searching for him. She only knew she hoped he would be safe. Hours later, the people of Silverpine Kingdom finally saw their Alpha King return. The palace filled with relief as Ethan walked through the grand halls once again. Advisors surrounded him with questions, but his thoughts were far away. He was thinking about the Omega in the forest who had changed everything. The royal court expected their king to return with the same cold confidence he had always carried. Instead, they noticed something different. Ethan listened more carefully. He spoke more gently. He seemed like someone who had discovered a part of himself he never knew was missing. That night, Ethan stood alone in the palace garden, looking toward the distant forest. For the first time, the crown on his shoulders felt different. He no longer wanted to rule only through strength and tradition. He wanted to build a kingdom where people like Lillian were seen, respected, and valued. But before he could change anything, he knew he had one important promise to keep. He needed to return to the Omega who had saved him, not as a king rewarding someone for a service, not as an alpha offering protection, but as someone who had finally found the person who saw his heart before she ever saw his title. The forest felt different after the silver wolf disappeared. Lillian Harper continued her daily routine, but the small cottage that once felt peaceful now carried a quiet emptiness. She still gathered herbs, prepared remedies, and helped the villagers whenever they needed her. But every evening, she found herself looking toward the path where the wolf had walked away. She wondered if he had finally found his home. She hoped he was safe. She never imagined that the wolf she cared for was actually Ethan Blackwood, the Alpha King she had only heard about in stories. In Silverpine Palace, Ethan struggled with something he had never experienced before. He had returned to the throne, but a part of him remained in the forest. The grand halls, the royal meetings, and the endless responsibilities felt familiar, yet something important was missing. He had spent years surrounded by people who admired his power, but only one person had ever cared for him without knowing his title. Ethan knew he could not keep the truth from Lillian forever. She deserved to know who he really was. More importantly, she deserved to know that the kindness she showed him had changed the way he viewed the world. A few days later, Ethan returned to the village near the forest. This time, he arrived not as a wolf hiding from the world, but as the Alpha King everyone respected. When Lillian saw him standing outside her cottage, she immediately recognized the eyes that had watched her beside the fireplace. Confusion filled her expression. "You are the wolf," she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "I was." Lillian stepped back, trying to understand the impossible truth in front of her. The quiet creature she had protected was the ruler of the entire kingdom. The person she had spoken to without fear was the most powerful alpha in the land. But Ethan did not want her to think about his crown. He wanted her to remember the person she had helped. "You saved me when you had no reason to," Ethan said. "You cared for me when you believed I had nothing to offer you." Lillian looked down, unsure how to respond. She had never expected recognition. She had never wanted a reward. She only did what she believed was right. That was exactly what amazed Ethan. He had met countless people who wanted to stand near power, but Lillian had stood beside him when he had none. As they talked, Ethan learned more about the struggles Lillian had faced. He discovered how often she had been overlooked because she was an Omega. He discovered how many times she had been told she was not important enough. But standing there, Ethan saw something the others had missed. Lillian was not someone who needed to prove her value. She carried it within her. Before leaving, Ethan made a promise. "The kingdom will know the truth one day," he said. "They will know the person who helped their Alpha King when no one else did." Lillian looked at him quietly. She still did not understand why someone as powerful as him cared about her. But Ethan knew the answer. The world had seen an Omega without a title. He had seen the heart of the person who saved him. And for the first time in his life, the Alpha King understood that destiny was not something found through power. Sometimes, destiny appeared quietly in the snow and waited for someone kind enough to notice. When Ethan Blackwood returned to Silverpine Palace with the truth about Lillian Harper in his heart, he expected the hardest challenge would be explaining his decision to the Royal Council. He was wrong. The hardest part was watching people judge someone they had never taken the time to understand. The Alpha King had spent years hearing opinions about strength, status, and tradition. But now, for the first time, he found himself standing against those expectations for someone else. News of the Omega who had saved the missing king traveled quickly through Silverpine Kingdom. Many people were surprised. Some were curious. Others questioned how an Omega from a quiet village could have earned the attention of the Alpha King. The same doubts that once followed Lillian began appearing again, only now they reached the walls of the palace. Lillian felt the weight of those opinions when Ethan invited her to visit Silverpine Palace. She had never imagined walking through royal halls. She had never dreamed of standing among powerful families and respected leaders. She wondered if she truly belonged in a place built around people like Ethan. But Ethan saw the uncertainty in her eyes and reminded her of something important. "You do not need to become someone else to belong here," he told her. "You already showed everyone who you are." Those words stayed with Lillian as she entered the palace. She did not try to impress anyone. She did not change the way she spoke or pretend to be someone she was not. She simply remained the same Omega who had offered kindness to a lonely wolf in the forest. During the royal gathering, some advisors questioned Ethan's choice. They believed an Alpha King should follow old traditions and choose someone with a powerful background. They did not understand why Ethan valued a person who had no royal name, no influence, and no position. Ethan listened quietly before answering. "You see an Omega from a small village," he said. "I see the person who cared for me when she believed I was nothing more than a lost wolf." The room became silent. For years, people had admired Ethan because of his strength and title. But Lillian had cared for him before she knew either existed. That difference mattered more than anyone realized. Lillian did not speak to defend herself. She did not need to. Her actions had already shown her character. The healers in the kingdom knew of her compassion. The villagers knew of her generosity. And Ethan knew the truth that mattered most. As the days passed, more people began seeing Lillian differently. Not because she stood beside the Alpha King, but because they finally noticed the kindness she had always carried. She had never needed a crown to have value. She had never needed approval to be worthy. Meanwhile, Ethan understood that protecting Lillian was no longer simply a promise. It was a choice he made with his entire heart. The Omega everyone once overlooked had become the person who reminded the Alpha King what leadership truly meant. And soon, the entire kingdom would learn why the strongest Alpha in Silverpine had chosen the one person who never tried to claim his power, only cared for his soul. The days following Lillian Harper's arrival at Silverpine Palace brought a change that no one expected. The grand halls that once felt distant and cold slowly became a place where new ideas began to grow. Lillian never arrived with the intention of changing the kingdom. She never asked for attention, influence, or recognition. She simply continued being the same Omega who had listened to a lonely wolf in the forest and offered kindness when others had walked away. But that quiet kindness began reaching people throughout Silverpine. The healers in the palace discovered that Lillian's knowledge could help improve the care given to villagers outside the capital. The servants noticed that she treated everyone with the same respect, whether they carried a royal title or worked behind the scenes. Even some of the advisors who once doubted her began to question their own assumptions. Ethan Blackwood watched these changes quietly. As the Alpha King, he had always believed progress came from powerful decisions made by those at the top. But Lillian showed him that sometimes the greatest changes started with one simple act of compassion. One afternoon, Ethan found Lillian in the palace garden speaking with a group of young healers. She was sharing stories from her village and explaining how small acts of care could make people feel seen. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing what she had learned through her own experiences. Ethan stood nearby and realized that this was the same person who had sat beside him when he was only a wolf in the snow. She had never changed. The world had simply begun seeing what he already knew. Later that evening, Ethan and Lillian walked through the garden beneath the soft glow of the moon. For the first time since entering the palace, Lillian looked peaceful. "I thought everyone here would see me as someone who does not belong," she admitted. Ethan looked at her with understanding. "You were never the one who did not belong. They were simply the ones who did not understand you." Lillian smiled softly, but she still worried about the future. She knew the kingdom was changing, but old beliefs did not disappear overnight. Ethan understood her concern. He had spent his entire life carrying the responsibility of leading others, and now he had another responsibility. He wanted to make sure Lillian was never forced to prove her worth again. The following day, Ethan made a public announcement before the people of Silverpine. He did not speak about Lillian because she was connected to the Alpha King. He spoke about her because of who she was. He told the kingdom about the Omega who showed kindness when she had every reason to close her heart. He told them about the person who saved a lost wolf without knowing she was saving their ruler. The people listened as the truth became clear. Lillian was never valuable because an Alpha King chose her. She was valuable because she had always carried that worth within herself. Standing beside Ethan, she looked across the kingdom and saw something she never thought she would see. Acceptance. The Omega who had once been rejected was now respected. The Alpha King who had everything had found the one thing he never knew he needed. And together, they showed Silverpine that true strength was not measured by power alone, but by the kindness someone chose to give when no one was watching. The first sunrise after Silverpine Kingdom accepted Lillian Harper was unlike any morning she had known before. The Omega who once walked through life believing she would always remain unseen now stood beside the Alpha King as the entire kingdom began to understand the truth about her heart. But Lillian never allowed admiration to change who she was. She still visited the villages, still helped the healers, and still listened to people who felt forgotten. She did not see herself as someone special. She only believed that kindness should never depend on status or power. Ethan Blackwood admired that more than anything. As the Alpha King, he had spent years believing that his role required him to carry every burden alone. He thought a ruler had to appear unshakable, even when the weight of responsibility became difficult. But Lillian had shown him another path. She had shown him that accepting support was not weakness. It was a different kind of strength. Months passed, and the kingdom slowly transformed. Old traditions that once created distance between people began to soften. Omegas who had once felt overlooked started to believe they had a voice. The people of Silverpine began to understand that worth was not decided by a title, a family name, or a position in society. It was revealed through actions. One evening, Ethan and Lillian returned to the forest where their journey had begun. The snow had melted, and new flowers had appeared along the path where she first found him. They stood quietly beneath the trees, remembering the night when neither of them knew what the future would bring. "I was only trying to help a wolf who needed someone," Lillian said with a gentle smile. Ethan looked at her and answered, "And you gave hope to a king who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen." Lillian looked down, remembering all the moments when she believed she was not enough. She remembered the voices that told her an Omega like her could never matter. But standing there with Ethan, she finally understood something important. Her value had never depended on whether others recognized it. It had always existed within her. Ethan also understood something that changed him forever. The greatest discovery of his life was not becoming Alpha King. It was finding the person who reminded him why he wanted to protect his kingdom in the first place. The wolf who once needed saving had found a home. The Omega who once felt rejected had found belonging. And the Alpha King who had everything except peace finally discovered the one connection that made his world feel complete. Their story became a reminder throughout Silverpine that destiny did not always arrive with grand signs or powerful declarations. Sometimes it appeared quietly, hidden in a snowy forest, waiting for someone with a kind heart to recognize it. Lillian never searched for a crown, and Ethan never expected to find his future beside someone the world had ignored. But together, they proved that the strongest bonds are not created by power. They are created by compassion, trust, and the courage to see the true value within another's soul.